transmission 100218.
Welcome to Porcelain Peak, a strange and scary podcast covering all things horror and science fiction. Here are your hosts, Anthony, John, and Anthony.
Welcome back, Porcelain Peeps. We are back to our normal business, and boy, do we have an exciting episode in store for you. This is going to be Season 2, Episode 40, and this episode is going to dive into meta horror with Courtney from the Courtney and Joe Spoil Everything podcast. I'm super excited to dive into that. It's something that we talk about all the time, so we might as well break it down. Before we get started with our news and that shit, let's meet the guys again to see how they're doing. How are you boys now that you're not in camp anymore?
I miss being a counselor, man. I want to go back. No, I was a little homesick for our regular shtick, and I think removing the camp veneer has opened up Pandora's box of horror and sci-fi content, and I'm really excited to be able to actually talk about things that aren't all stemmed off of one very niche subgenre. So I'm pretty happy about that.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting time for us moving forward. How are you doing, regular old Anthony?
Regular old's a little bit rude. Yeah, I don't know how to live my life if not as a camp counselor. You know, the short shorts and the crop tops just don't do it in the regular world. I was able to wear those things and rock those things out in the campground. You know, I had all that power, and now I'm just a nobody. So I just set up a little sheet tent in my bedroom and pretend I can be back there until next summer. But yeah, no, in reality, I'm excited to get back to, not really normal business, because I feel like over the course of Camp Porcelain Peak, we grew quite a bit as a show. So I feel like we're actually coming back almost as an even newer reincarnation of the Porcelain Peak show with guests now. Yeah, like you were saying. So got a big conversation coming up.
Yeah, featuring guests.
Monday.
Right, so like I mentioned earlier, we are going to be talking about meta horror, and so just to give you kind of a glimpse of what that's going to look like, it's a little bit about what that is, kind of the history of it, movies that do it really well, what we like about it, kind of our origins with it, and what we want to see moving forward. So that'll be coming up in just a little bit, but first, you know the deal, we got to get started with some news.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big breaking TV. Fuck the prime time, bitch.
This just in. You are no longer in the wilderness, so we now have the internet.
To get us started with the news, I wanted to share some box office stuff that I thought was pretty exciting, some numbers. So we mentioned that Peninsula was coming out soon. It's the sequel to Train to Busan, and this was released already overseas, and it opened up with a $20 million weekend. So that's pretty exciting that it's doing really well. I haven't looked at any of the reviews or anything. I don't want to particularly, because if I go into it, I want to go into it with my own opinions and everything. And that tends to kind of sway my opinion. But I'm excited that stuff is releasing, although maybe it's in China. And I know that it's already up on some sites as cams, but I'm going to give it the respect it deserves because this is something that is really close to me. And as you all know, Train to Busan is a pod fave. We love that movie, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's definitely meat left on the bones for that series, and I think that the fact that it is finding some success through all of this is a good indication that cinema's not dead yet. That it's still got there's still a pulse, God damn it, and it's going to survive.
It's just going to be kind of a year without movies. You know, I think that's probably what this year is going to be like.
It fucking hurts.
Yeah, it's sucked, especially going through summer. I mean, summer is the time really that going to the movies is something that helps me cope with just how miserable summer in general tends to be. Especially living in California. It gets quite hot, And when you don't have those nice air-conditioned movie theaters to go to, it can be a little bit rough. But I'm stoked for Peninsula. I agree with everything you said. I am not going to be trying to find some shitty quality copy of it or something. I'm going to give it its time, and it's a movie that I think I'm a little anxious just because Train to Busan is just so good. It makes me nervous anytime one of these really successful movies says, okay, we're going to do it again but bigger. That's good to hear that with the limited amount of theaters that are able to show things that it's making money, and that it seems to be something that people are really excited about. So.
Yeah, so that's all that I had for news. What about you, John? JD, John?
So, keeping it in the vein of theaters and kind of what's going on in the current landscape of cinema, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, was supposed to come out, I believe it was either this summer or fall. That got pushed back because the devil made him do it to, I believe, June of next year. So we're getting a lot more movies that are taking more realistic approaches to their reslatings. I mean, because you can always move it back up if for whatever reason there's a vaccine, we get herd immunity, whatever. But the likelihood is that 2020 is a misfire. That cinema's not going to be able to constitute opening with all of what's going on. Because, I mean, you don't want to have another hotspot as another place to point fingers at, lawsuits, all that other shit. So I think that it's best that they stay closed for the foreseeable future. I think that we just kind of reset our clocks to 2021, and hopefully some people will release some cool shit to VOD.
Yeah, if not, I can wait. It's not like those movies are going anywhere. They're ready to come out. They're just waiting for the right time, and so we're still going to get them. So if that means that we're going to get double the amount of movies next year, fucking sign me up.
Yeah. I think more likely it just means everything we should have gotten this year we'll get next year, and they'll push everything even farther out. But something that I did want to touch on that you just reminded me of that isn't actually part of my news, but it's something that I heard about, is that AMC was actually able to restructure their debt and do some behind-the-scenes financial twiddling, and they were able to get themselves to a point where they say they will successfully be able to survive through, I think, like spring of next year and be fine with not showing really any movies and not reopening. So they're kind of gearing toward the idea that it looks like theaters are going to largely be opening sometime next year as opposed to this year. I think that's kind of the camp that everybody is in. But in terms of my news, I had a couple things that kind of go in tandem, because first, I read here on Bloody Disgusting that Edgar Wright, one of our favorites, I know especially for you, John, is directing a ghost story movie called Stage 13 for Amblin Entertainment. It looks like the movie is written by Simon Rich from Saturday Night Live and is an adaptation of one of his short stories. The plot is the film follows the ghost of a silent film era actress that has haunted the titular soundstage of a backlot for decades. After a struggling director meets the ghost, they find an unexpected kinship and team to make their mark on the world. Which sounds just off-kilter and weird enough to be perfect for Edgar Wright. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like he is co-writing that movie and directing it. It sounds like he has a lot. He had the Last Night in Soho that was supposed to come out this year that I think got pushed or just got delayed indefinitely.
Yeah.
Tenet also got delayed indefinitely. So there's a lot of stuff that I think is in that camp right now. But on the TV side of news, also kind of going along with that Edgar Wright news, Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, I think we might have talked about this earlier, but now we have some photos if people want to hop on and check these out. Have a new show coming to Amazon. It's a horror comedy called Truth Seekers. And they're now, it looks like we're getting closer. There's no official release date for this, but it says it's a horror comedy series about a team of part-time paranormal investigators who team up to uncover ghosts. Dude, I was going to say, it sounds like
Ghostfacers.
Yeah.
How funny.
Yeah, and they uncover some sort of like Armageddon conspiracy. So it sounds perfect for those two. So if we don't end up getting any of these Edgar Wright projects in terms of movies for a while, hopefully we can look forward to getting some Simon Pegg and some Nick Frost on the television front of things in the meantime. Since there are already photos out of that, like you're saying, things that are already in production are finished, we'll probably still get within some reasonable amount of time. So yeah, I was pretty stoked about both of those things, like all those guys.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I am a fan of the, Cornetto trilogy?
Yeah, Cornetto trilogy.
Yeah, those are all good, and obviously it's those three main people that you just talked about, so
yeah.
I'm looking forward to that.
Another sleeper hit for them, Paul. I loved Paul.
Paul.
I actually had someone on the Instagram recently tell me that I needed to check out Paul because I had asked, and that's something that I can touch on also briefly while we're here, is that we put out a question for our audience last week, what's your favorite alien invasion movie? I got a lot of really good answers. I think the Radio Nasties guys said Invasion of the Body Snatchers and The Thing, which are amazing choices. But yeah, I did have a recommendation to check out Paul because I hadn't seen it, and I still haven't seen it, but I've heard good things. So
it is very funny. I mean, just imagine. Just close your eyes and imagine with me. A little gray alien with the laugh of Seth Rogen. That's all you need to know, baby.
I don't know if that was a Seth Rogen laugh or if
that was my real laugh.
No,
I've been hiding it for decades.
That was your how you sound in the bedroom.
Whoa! All right. Well, that is the end of news. If you want more news, then you can head over to Twitter, where the stuff that we weren't able to talk about on the show, we post over there.
Thank you so much, Ashley the intern, for providing us with all of that lovely, lovely news.
Now that news is over, we'll get to the good stuff. See if Mr. Silva can keep his peak streak as we move into trivia. John?
Here's how we play. I ask a question. If you get it right, Steve lives.
Please don't do this.
Come on, it'll be fun.
Please.
It's an easy category.
Please.
Movie trivia. Or even give you a warm-up question.
Don't do this again.
Name the killer.
Since Anthony won last week, we are going to let him pick the game, and he decided on the game simply called Horror Trivia.
Yeah, I like when it's simple, it's straightforward. I don't have to think too much.
Simple, just like lemonade.
So I will read to John. John's going to read to Anthony. Anthony will back to me, Tone. And how this works, if you haven't seen them already, then it's 2 cards. It's 2 questions per card, and we're going to do 3 cards each. John, your first question is, I keep wanting to call you Counselor John. Who is considered to be Hollywood's first Scream Queen?
Is that going to be Jamie Lee Curtis?
That is going to be Jamie Lee Curtis, correct.
Cool.
Good job. Off to a great start. Not Counselor John.
Jamily.
Jamily?
Jamily Curtis. Curtains.
Not Counselor Anthony. What is the name of Broken Lizard's 2004 slasher film that was released after Super Troopers?
Thanks for pointing out to everybody that I was stripped of my counselor title. Honestly, I have absolutely no clue.
Club Dread.
It is indeed Club Dread.
Never seen it.
I think it's worth watching.
Yeah, I think that it didn't live up to Super Troopers as a follow-up to that because that's kind of a cult classic.
Yeah.
And so I think that it was probably a little bit disappointing to some people, but it's fine, yeah.
Yeah,
Horror comedy.
Yeah, as someone who's a fan of horror and who's a fan of comedy, I feel like it blends pretty well.
Yeah.
I'll have to check it out. I have heard the title, but didn't even know it was by those guys. Like, didn't even know that it was the same group that did. And I really like Super Troopers. So, yeah, cool. I did not know that. In an equally as difficult and hard-hitting question, Tone. Set in 1630s New England, what 2015 movie involves an English farmer and his family who relocates to a forest which lurks an unknown evil?
The Witch?
Ooh, sorry, it was the Vavitch.
I think you're being a real Vavitch right now.
Yeah, it's the Witch.
All right. So after the first round, it is 1 for me, 1 for John, and no points yet for Anthony.
Yeah, don't write me off yet.
All right. Well, this is very coincidental. How was Jason Voorhees brought back to life in Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives?
Shocked by an errant lightning bolt?
Yeah, so just lightning bolts,
Yeah.
electricity, which is funny because we are definitely going to be talking about that later.
Yeah.
And we just talked about it in our camp.
Spoilers.
Spoilers. Nice job, John.
Thanks. Anthony, which J.J. Abrams film had the tentative title 1-1808?
Is it Cloverfield?
It is indeed Cloverfield.
I try to throw you off, though, because that's technically Matt Reeves, isn't it?
Yeah. But they do that in this game because they did the same thing with the mama question. Saying it was Guillermo del Toro. It's like okay, I get it that because it was Matt Reeves did that and Drew Goddard I think did Cabin in the Woods, but they both always get called like a Joss Whedon film and a J.J. Abrams film, and it's whoever the like producer or whatever was. But
Name recognition, essentially.
yeah, basically.
Good job, though. You still got it.
Hey, I'm on the board. This one I think is really gonna stump you. Leatherface was a character In what horror film?
Technically, Leatherface,
I was going to say several.
but Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the one that you're looking for.
The question wants you to name every single installment in the franchise.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, Texas Chainsaw Massacre The Next Generation, then the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and then did that get a sequel?
Yeah, they did a
3D boy.
Texas Chainsaw. Well, no, they did like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre prequel.
Oh, right. And
to
then
that one.
3D, and then Leatherface.
And then Leatherface, yeah. No, actually, it just said Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but I wanted you to do that, so.
Thanks. Flex my muscle.
Works in your muscles.
All right, so 2 for me, 2 for John, and Anthony is on the board with 1 himself. As we get into round 3, John, what is Norman Bates' hobby in the movie Psycho?
Dressing up as his mother?
It's taxidermy.
Yeah.
Yeah, his hobby.
I would say that they're both hobbies.
I'd say one is maybe like a compulsion, and one is just a thing he does for fun.
What's an illness, John?
I thought you were going to say his hobby was, one of his hobbies is peeking at people in the shower,
Yeah.
but being a peeping Tom. But I thought you were going to say his hobby was stabbing people to death.
Yeah. Like I said, a lot of hobbies. He's got a long list.
Yeah.
Got a long list of hobbies.
Hobbies.
I'd hire him.
Oh, God. What insects are closely associated with the urban legend of Candyman?
It's bees.
Not the bees!
The bees!
It is indeed the bees.
All right, Tone. What is the name of the docile and domesticated zombie in Day of the Dead?
Is it Bud?
I'm so sorry.
It's Bub.
Bub.
Did you just call me Blob?
I knew something like that. Fuck. All right.
Oh, it was so close.
So close.
That was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Literally, you just needed to flip the D.
You know how I do. I always be flipping that D. Anyway, at the end of that round, that ties us all up at 2. Hey. Here we go with round 4. John, what TV show remake is based on a 1985 movie starring Michael J. Fox as a high school basketball player?
Is that going to be Teen Wolf?
That is Teen Wolf, correct. To take the lead.
Anthony, what country was the 2005 movie Wolf Creek set in?
Australia?
It is indeed Australia.
Nice job, Down Under.
Never seen it, but that's the one where the dingo eats the baby, right? Tone. Just regular Tone. Boring old Tone.
Damn, that's insensitive.
What actor stars in the 1999 film Stir of Echoes, in which a man sees visions after being hypnotized?
That's going to be Kevin P. Bacon.
There we go.
Ooh, actually, it's Kevin C. Bacon. Kevin Crispy Bacon.
See, I thought it was Kevin Pepper to be.
But yeah, it is Kevin Bacon. Good job.
So we're all tied up still?
Yep.
As we move into...
All tied up like a home invasion movie.
Oh!
Round 5.
Here we go with round 5. John, who wrote the short story on which the film Children of the Corn was based?
That's going to be Stephen P. King.
What's he peeking at? That is correct, sir. Nice job. With another lead momentarily, I'm sure.
Yeah. Monsieur Silva.
C.
Anthony, what are the names of the demon hunting brothers in the television series Supernatural?
Sam and Dean Winchester.
It is indeed Sam and Dean Winchester.
Damn, nice job.
It's Sam P. and Dean P. Winchester.
Just gonna drive that joke straight into the ground.
That's how you got to do it. You kill it and it's dead.
And if it was on Supernatural, it would be brought back to life right away.
Yep. With some weird, deep, gravelly voice.
For 15 more seasons. Tone. What 2005 film starring Jennifer Connelly was based on a book by the author of the Ring trilogy?
Vacancy. I don't know.
It was Dark Water.
All right, so as we move into the final round, John is at 4, Anthony's at 4, and I am at 3. So if either of them get this question, then I am automatically out. So basically, I'm out. What Duffer Brothers TV show takes place in Hawkins, Indiana, and features a young boy's disappearance?
That would be Stranger Things.
Yeah, that's it, man. Good job. How is it that we switch trivia games and you still end on a Stranger Things card?
crazy happenstance.
That's just the way the universe be, bro.
That's crazy, dude.
Anthony, who is the actual father in the movie that you haven't seen, Rosemary's Baby?
It's Satan?
It is indeed Satan.
Similarly to the last card where you got a question that was not up your alley, you get a follow-up question if you want to answer it, Tone.
Yeah, sure.
What 1960s Gothic television soap opera depicted the lives of the wealthy Collins family and was remade into a film starring Jonathan Depp?
Dark Shadows, yes?
Yeah, correct. It was Dark Shadows.
Nice. It was also remade into another TV show. I lost with 4, but the boys are tied at 5. So we're going to go ahead and do a tiebreaker. Hopefully.
I hate tiebreakers.
Not as intense as the last tiebreaker, because that was a wreck. What sci-fi horror film does a black hole unleash its evil upon the actors Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill? Done.
Event Horizon.
Who is also known as the mistress of dark? Done.
Elvira.
Okay. Name this movie. What's in the box? Done.
7.
What attacks a group of teens in the 1986 movie Chopping Mall when they are trapped inside a shopping mall after dark? Done.
Killer robots.
Ooh, actually, the correct answer is security robots. What is the name of the serial killer in the 2004 movie Saw? Done.
Jigsaw. Like his actual name? Mm-hmm. John Kramer, I think?
That's it. There we go. All right, so counselor. Nope. Not counselor, just regular old, good old-fashioned Anthony won trivia this week, meaning that he's on a 2-peak streak. Congrats. If you want more trivia, then you can head over to YouTube and watch us do it. And if you want even more content, you can head over to any of our socials where we're having a good time. We're chit-chatting. We're sharing cool posts. We have extended watch lists. We got more news. We got Trivia Tuesdays sometimes. We got all kinds of stuff. So check those out, guys. And if you want to donate, do that at patreon.com/PorcelainPeak, where you can give us a little bit of money or a lot of bit of money.
Yeah, cash us outside.
Yeah, cash us inside. You can cash us anywhere. We have a very special main discussion coming, and we will get to that right now.
I know this steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, the Matrix is telling my brain that it is juicy and delicious. After 9 years, you know what I realize? Ignorance is bliss.
For our main discussion this week, we are going to be joined by Courtney of the Spoil Everything podcast. Courtney, how you doing?
Good, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you on, and this is a topic that we all are really excited to talk about. We did
Definitely.
briefly when we talked about one of the Friday the 13th, so to really dive into it should be fun. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your show?
I host a podcast with my friend Joe. It's called Courtney and Joe Spoil Everything. And basically, we watch just the pilot episode and the series finale of TV shows that we've never seen before without watching anything in between. And we got that idea because I saw this great article where some girl was trying to piece together when she had only seen 2 episodes of a TV show, which was one of my favorite shows. And I was like, oh my God, this is hysterical. She sounds like an idiot. And I was like, well, I could sound like an idiot in a podcast for a little while.
Sounds like our motto.
Yeah, exactly. I have TV and film experience. Joe worked in production before. We're like, well, we'll just do that. We'll mix in our own stories with it, and it'll be entertaining because everyone who's fans of those shows is going to be like, what are these two talking about, basically? So it's been a blast.
So do you try to piece together how it got from point A to point B?
Yeah, we do. So we break it down into 2 episodes when we record, and we do it genuinely, like we've never seen anything. So we'll watch the pilot, and we'll record that episode. We'll talk about our thoughts. We go scene by scene. We'll talk about predictions, anything that we might have known, just, from previews or something over time. And then when we watch the series finale, we have to try to piece together basically what happened in the middle, see what kind of predictions panned out, if any, and just talk about what we like and don't like about it. We often find that the series finale can kind of be a letdown. There's some really sharp pilots out there, and then sometimes they just kind of lose their steam in the series finale.
What was your favorite thing that you've watched for the show in that format, and your least favorite thing that you've watched for the show in that format?
Oh, you guys are gonna laugh. So I would say the best pilot I've seen is Baywatch.
Oh, no way.
Wow.
So we've been doing a lot of these. I think Baywatch may be our 15th show or something like that. So because we've watched so many pilots, I was like, this is really well done for its time. Because I always thought, I'm like, oh, it's going to be cheesy, but they're doing some pretty earnest acting. It makes you feel nostalgic. So I think that was the one that Joe and I we were the most pumped about. We just really enjoyed it from point A to point B. The one that I think was probably I just did not care for was Battlestar Galactica, because I had such a hard time following it. There's a mini series that happens before the series happens. Well, we didn't start with it. We started right with episode 1. And I was like, what am I? Who am I? Where am I? What is this? So Joe kind of just guided me through that episode.
Yeah, and I think for Battlestar Galactica fans, they'd probably be very, very pissed off at the idea of watching only 2 episodes, the first one and the last one, because I know that there are some very diehard Battlestar Galactica fans out there. For a horror and sci-fi podcast, that's something that's actually has never really been on my radar, so I would almost be interested in going in and doing the same thing, just watching the pilot in the last episode and seeing what I could piece together.
It was almost when we did it, I felt like I didn't need to see anything in the middle. I was like, well, I got the story, and I got the ending of the story. Where other shows, you're like, who are they? That, you were just like, well, that could have just been a 3-hour movie and called it a day. So I don't know. It was a different experience.
So Anthony mentioned to me earlier that you guys recently did the Scream TV show. So when you go into shows that are either an anthology series where, with American Horror Story, each season is different, or with Scream where they changed it after the first 2, are you watching the first episode of the entire series, or do you go season by season with those?
Well, typically we have steered away from anthologies in general, because I'm like, well, those are going to be easy to put together. We kind of like a challenge almost, but I wanted to do Scream because I was such a big Scream fan all my life of the franchise, and I was so against that TV show. So when we did that particular episode, we did it the regular format. We took the first 2 seasons, because they were their own little thing, and we did the first episode and the last episode. And then what I did is I went in and I watched season 3, and I told Joe all the reasons why season 3 was better than the other 2, because it fit more closely to Scream the movies. So we took kind of a different way in that. But yeah, if we were going to continue doing any anthologies, we would just take it season by season and do it in that way.
I mean, that makes sense, because I can only imagine if you watched, I don't know, Murder House from American Horror Story and then just watched Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Well, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
We talked about that. We're like, wouldn't it just be hysterical if we had no idea that American Horror Story was an anthology? And we're just like, what the hell? They all look different in this one. Yeah.
Why is this guy part dolphin?
Yeah. Exactly.
I think that segues nicely into the topic. But yeah, I had been listening to your guys' the Scream TV series episode, and you were basically right in line with, I remember how Anthony here and I felt, because we lived together at the time when that show came out, and we were cautiously optimistic, but for the most part, I think we were pretty convinced it was not going to come anywhere near matching the movies, and we're diehard fans of the Scream franchise as well. So listening to your episode, I felt like you lined up pretty well with how we felt about that series, but more importantly, I felt like you had the passion for the Scream franchise, for this genre, that is going to make for a good conversation. So I was excited to hear that you were just really defending the movie tooth and nail.
Oh yeah, I just found, you know how Facebook will bring up memories. I just found one today where my friend and I had an entire conversation when Scream the TV series came out, and he was telling me oh, you gotta watch, and I'm telling him in every comment no, this is why I'm not watching it, and everything I said turned out to be right.
All right, so then today we'll go ahead and get started with our main discussion on what meta horror is. So, general idea of how this conversation is going to go, talk briefly about what meta horror is and the history of it, and then probably a little bit about our experiences with it, why we all like it, and then, as we've kind of already done, but in more detail, the good and the bad examples of what that means, and maybe what we hope to see moving forward. So, does anybody want to tell us kind of what that is for any listeners that don't know exactly what meta horror is?
What is meta horror? I feel like so meta horror is one of those things that is kind of broad in terms of what could be classified as meta horror, which I feel like is going to be a big part of this conversation because I think we'll probably all have maybe slightly different origin points for this genre. But basically, the most important part of meta film in general is they're movies that comment on movies. They're movies that have some sort of self-referentiality or have some sort of commentary directly on basically the act of filmmaking. And in the case of horror meta, these are movies that are self-referential or commenting or borderline parodying, but not necessarily getting into spoof territory, horror tropes and the horror genre in general. So these movies are kind of,
they get into full-blown spoof territory.
Yeah, and that can be something where we can talk about whether, which movies do it successfully and which don't. But it's typically a movie that is well aware of the act of filmmaking, well aware that movies exist, and it is kind of folding that into the storytelling of the movie in some way. Some are more extreme than others, and we can get into some examples as we go along, but that's a pretty general definition, I would say, of meta horror.
Yeah, I always call it a satire, right? Like, it's not... Scary Movie is a spoof, right? Like, all the meta horror to me is like a satire. It's like when you read Animal Farm, it's like, well, we know what the frig they're talking about. You know what I mean? And when you watch those, it's like, it makes it seem realistic. You're like, well, I could be in that position. I've watched all these movies. I know all these, like, old folklore and stories. I could easily be in that position. So I think that's kind of what meta is. It's like, it's making it even more realistic.
I agree with that completely. We've even talked about it, I think, recently, where it's kind of frustrating when you watch horror movies or even like specifically zombie movies, and they're like, "What is a zombie?" It's like, so you live in a world where no zombie movies exist?
Yeah, exactly.
I like that a lot of these movies, and Scream, which we'll have to talk about at some point, is very self-aware.
Yeah.
And it's like, here, we're at the video store. Look at all these movies that built what we're going to build upon.
And that's the fun of it, I think. You know what I mean? Like, horror's great for its own, if you're into the gore, if you're into the mystery. But when you start getting into the area where you're like, oh my God, they're actually referencing shit that I watched when I was a kid, I just love that.
Yeah, it's super fun to deconstruct, and I feel like that's a lot of what the fun of meta horror ends up being is watching how different people deconstruct the genre, this genre that we're all so passionate about and that we love so much. It almost feels academic sometimes, even if the movie is really goofy. I'll be watching something and I'll go, oh yeah, that totally does happen all the time in horror movies, and like I'm glad that was brought up. Yeah, so that's always the fun of it, and that's always been the fun for me since I kind of realized that meta horror existed. That's kind of an epiphany for me. So.
All right, so before we share our experiences with meta horror, we'll go ahead and give you just a brief history now that you know what it is.
From a history perspective, slasher movies were so big in the 70s and 80s because that's when we were introduced to Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, like all those strong silent types. And then you even got some weird stuff like Sleepaway Camp where you got your little twist, and Child's Play where you're kind of making, everyday toys crazy. But all that started to fizzle out. So they tried to kind of basically find a new medium where they're like, well, where can we pay homage to those guys? Come up with our own path, but still use like all the rules basically that go along with a horror movie or a slasher movie. And so that's kind of where the idea came from when they came up with Scream, which I know we're going to talk about. That was in 96. But I think even before then, they were doing meta and weren't aware of it. Like when they did Fright Night back in, I forget what year that came out. Fright Night was so meta that they didn't even realize it. Like they had a kid in there who was obsessed with horror movies. They had the guy who was like, the creature feature TV host. They had like all the vampire rules that they knew, and then like would just like highlight that throughout the movie and didn't even realize they were doing it. So I think it started back in the 80s, but you really saw it kind of in the 90s, the mid 90s, just really come to life and then explode for the rest of the 90s and the early 2000s.
I have basically the same timeline. The only thing is I found some examples that were maybe even a little bit earlier.
Like Peeping Tom.
So Peeping Tom would be one. One that I hadn't even thought of that I read about that I was like, oh yeah, 100% would be the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Even from the opening song is singing, science fiction double feature, and it's explaining what the movie is going to be to you at the very beginning. It's like, Dr. X will build a creature, it's explaining the movie, and then the entire movie is self-referential to both Universal monsters, which already at that point I feel like it started getting self-referential through all of the different like Hammer, remakes and all of that stuff. But yeah, then right up after that in my notes I have Fright Night. in the 80s, which, yeah, absolutely. I agree with what you said. It was a movie that took all of those like vampire tropes and had the character aware of them from the beginning, which was a pretty big deal, I think, for people who were fans of vampire movies. But it did something that I think is important that I definitely want to stress as we get into movies like Scream and the future is it took those tropes, but it respected them. So then from there, we kind of moved through the 80s with things like Jason Lives being something that I wasn't even aware was a meta movie until I watched it.
all of them.
Right.
And Jason Lives ends up being a huge inspiration, it turns out, for Scream. Is it Kevin Williamson said that he was directly influenced by Jason Lives. And I found out actually recently when doing this research that Tom McLaughlin had been asked to come make Scream before Craven was involved. And he said, no, I already made that movie. It's called Jason Lives.
Oh my God, that's amazing. You know, I felt that way about New Nightmare when it came out because I was young and I was like, what the fuck am I watching? Like, I don't understand what I'm watching. You know what I mean? Because I hadn't quite like dived into Scream yet, and I was like, this is out there, you know? But it took a couple years for my appreciation to grow.
New Nightmare is a really interesting example of Craven kind of dipping his toe into this genre for the first time. And I think a lot of people were probably really confused by that at the get-go. Because he hadn't quite perfected it. I think by the time Scream came around, people were like, okay, I get it. But with New Nightmare, I think diehard Nightmare fans might not have been prepared for something that was that left turn and out of the box.
It's weird to go from these kind of like hammed up over-the-top versions of Freddy and then bring Craven back into the fold and then just pull everything out into an outside lens. I think that was something that the fans of the series, if you were watching things in order as they were coming out, you would have had no anticipation that was coming. So by doing that, you've shirked all of the responsibility of keeping up with all the old things that were getting tired and played out, and allowed yourself a new playground of things in order to kind of explain and explore what Freddy is actually capable of. And I think that New Nightmare is definitely kind of like the baby steps towards Scream for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because it was almost like you were watching, you're like, am I watching behind the scenes footage? Like, what exactly is this? So yeah, it's so interesting.
Yeah, and I think that one even goes even more balls to the wall with some of the meta stuff in terms of having Wes be an actual character in the movie. You know, having the director be a part of the movie. But yeah, from there, like you said, the floodgates kind of explode open. You get a little bit of meta with things like Candyman and In the Mouth of Madness. Those are examples that didn't hit it quite as big, but Candyman obviously has had a huge resurgence in recent years, and that's a movie that a lot of people are taking a lot more of a notice and appreciation toward. But that movie, is self-referential toward urban legends and just horror stories in general. Then that brings us to Scream and all of the teen meta craziness that exploded off of that and became like the big 90s trend.
Which kind of forced the genre to collapse in on itself. So what do you think, Courtney, is the state of the genre now? Do you think that it still works, or do you like that it kind of, you only get once in a while these meta movies that are really meta?
We get like Cabin in the Woods has got to be my example for this because I dug on all the meta up to that point where I'm the Scream ultimate fan. Even urban legend, I'm kind of even into that side of things, right? But when they did Cabin in the Woods, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was neat because they took these rules. They didn't just say, oh, there's all these rules. They explained why the rules are happening, right? So I'm on board for that piece a little bit, but I think they kind of took it. I didn't want to see that far behind the curtain. And that's, I think, the last one we kind of left off on. And I was like, well, where's it going to go from here? Like, I know Scream 5 is coming, and I'm super excited for that, even though, they say they're going to honor Wes and all that kind of stuff. But I don't want to see it go as far as Cabin in the Woods did. It was good. It's a good one-off. We don't need any more of those, but I think that was like a little too far almost, where it seemed like this is almost like scientific now, and I don't want the science part of it. I want the character-driven part of it.
I can totally get that argument. Although I am firmly planted in the
camp.
On the camp of being like a diehard fan of Cabin in the Woods. Like, I love the shit out of that movie, but I completely see where you're coming from because it really does try to be the end-all be-all of meta horror movies. I think that's what they were trying to do, and I read a lot of articles while I was doing research for this saying, hey, like, Cabin in the Woods is basically the end of this genre.
Courtney, do you think that movies now try too hard too often to fit into this meta category?
Yeah, for sure. I think that when you found Scream, it was like lightning in a bottle. Like Kevin Williamson, I knew I loved him before I knew who he was. I was a big Dawson's Creek fan. I was a big Scream fan, and didn't even know they were related. You know what I mean? He was so good at like being like, here's regular people, but I'm gonna up them a little bit. Like everybody's dialogue, everybody's personality is gonna be upped a little bit. So they really they caught him. He was almost like the John Hughes of like that self-referential kind of thing. When they went on from that, it's like I think it's overplayed a little bit. I appreciated the ones that came after it. You know, Urban Legend was 2 years after Scream, I think, and then they would go on. They would do a few more. That can get played out, but I don't want to ever be to a point where we're like, God, I've seen that 400 times. Like that's why I love like Jordan Peele's movies. Like he's trying something brand new. He's almost doing like a little meta himself, like a little nod to society type thing. So he's kind of taken in a different direction, which I appreciate. But yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, because they had found success with that, they're like, oh, well, we'll just make 12 copies of similar ideas that go along. If you look at Urban Legend, it's almost a carbon copy of Scream, just with folklore, basically. So that's kind of, I'm disappointed. I think it has lost some of its steam.
Well, I think like the point that you made about Jordan Peele is like it almost seems like people have to be a little bit more or a lot more subtle if they're going to do that type of
Like with
style.
Like with Chud and Us.
Yeah, so
Right.
they have to be a little bit more subtle that they're referencing the horror genre at large or the sci-fi genre at large without having a character like a Randy going, "These are the rules," like and lining them out to the audience.
I mean, Randy was what you needed at that point because everyone that had watched those old slashers by the time Scream came out, they're probably in their 20s and 30s, except for, you know, us who were younger and were discovering it for the first time. So it's like you needed someone to go, all right, this is how it plays out. Now, you know, they tried to even do that in the Scream TV show, and that character annoyed the shit out of me when we did that. When we did it for the pod, I was like, get him out of here. Like, it's too over the top. It's too, like, booky. I don't even know how to say it, like bookwormish or something. It was not right.
Yeah, Randy had that perfect mix where like you could tell he was annoying and his friends thought he was kind of annoying too. But he was also you. Like when you're going into that movie, if you're a horror fan, Randy is you. So you're like, okay, this is me with my friends. You know, we're lucky that we're at least the three of us. We're usually surrounded by people who want to talk about this stuff, but. You know, a lot of time you find yourself in a situation where you're rambling about something horror related and the person sitting next to you is like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like, yeah. Yeah, so watching Scream, you're like, these are my people. This is my man.
I think that's why I took such a liking to it because I just got off of, we did the Center Cut, another podcast. Joe and I guested on that, and Scream, they have a similar concept to us where they watch first 15 minutes of a movie and the last 15 minutes of the movie and try to like fill in the middle. And they did Scream, so they had us on as guests, and they're like, what did you like about this? Because the three of them are so not into it, and I was like, what is there not to love about this? Like, you tell me.
Yeah.
Do we want to do our first experiences?
I mean, I think that'd be fun, yeah.
Yeah. You want to get us started, John?
I would say that my first experience was probably Scream. I was shown that movie by a friend, and I was probably like 10 or so. It's probably a little too early to see that movie, but I was completely enthralled because like I'd watched other horror films before. I'd watched a lot of like the Universal Monsters stuff. I'd watched a couple of odd slashers here and there. It was a really cool experience because I was like, oh, this is referencing things that I get, and I like that it plays it a little tongue in cheek and it doesn't go too far over the top in its use of references. Like we've talked about Rim of the World the other day. Where basically that movie is just an hour and 45 minutes of references, and it's not in a good way, you know. Like they don't try to keep anything folded under the surface. It's all like just blatantly, this is from that movie, like. And I felt like Scream did such a great job of not falling for that kind of trick, basically, in order to try to like rope in a younger audience. They made it about younger people. They made some of their characters likable. And people were just drawn to it. And like I said, the meta stuff kind of came secondary. But it was just such a cool look back at the genre. And as I watch it probably at least a couple times a year now. Going back and revisiting that film is just, it's so much fun. And it opened up an entire new genre for me. So like going through kind of my journey with it, like I went back and I watched things like New Nightmare because I'd already watched a couple of the Friday the 13th, or not Friday the 13th, excuse me, Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And I went back and watched New Nightmare, and it's so cool that it, like I said, it takes itself out and looks at it from an outside perspective rather than like being in the driver's seat of it with the kids. And then from there, things like, I think I watched Rubber a long time ago. That movie is more of it's a rough watch, but it is definitely meta.
That's the tire, right?
Yes, the one about the tire. It is B movie meta for sure.
Have you seen that one, Courtney?
I watched 5 minutes of it and I got the concept and I was done. Like, it's just
Yeah.
so out there.
I was on a walk the other day, and I saw just a tire sitting in an alleyway, and I got a little bit nervous for a second. I was like, but what if though? But what if? So I walked a little bit faster.
Yeah, you just start thinking about all the objects that could kill you.
Yeah, I'm sure that's how Stephen King lives. Like, he just sees a lamp on a desk and he's like, but what if?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Courtney, we'll go ahead and shoot it over to you. What was your first kind of experience with the meta genre?
So mine was also Scream, and I guess to explain, I gotta go back. So I grew up on horror. They let me watch, and I say they as in my grandparents and my parents let me watch Pet Sematary when I was 3. It's not most people are watching The Little Mermaid. I'm watching Pet Sematary. So I was already really into scary movies since I was a kid. They never scared me. I mean, we had kind of a creepo family. Like I used to say, my uncle, his birthday was on Halloween, and he'd go outside and float around as a ghost. And I thought I was 15 before I realized he was the ghost. Like we were just used to like weird like tricks and stuff like that. So I always grew up with all that stuff. And Scream comes out 96. I discover it the summer of 97. I'm 12, I think, at that point, 11, 12 years old. And I run it with my friend. We're just having a sleepover type thing, and we put it in. And I mean, when you watch that first 15 minutes, it's like terrifying, right? So, and I remember she's sobbing and she's like, Mom, make her turn it off. And I wouldn't let her turn it off. And so I terrorized her for the rest of the night with it. But we fell in love with it. We were like, wow, this is so different from, we had watched stupid shit like The Dentist. You remember that movie with all the teeth yanking?
Yeah.
That was like, whatever. We watched this, and the characters we fell in love with, like the story. Every minute of that movie, you're guessing, like, well, who the hell is it? You know what I mean? Like, that whole whodunit was done so well. So we, every week, and I am not kidding, I probably kept the video store in business because we biked from her house up to the video rental place, rented Scream, came back. I mean, we saw that movie so many times, I think we wore the tape out. But that was, like, our first experience. And we're like, wow, like, here's something where you actually, like these people, whether they're the good guys or the bad guys. And, you really kind of connect to a story more so than any other scary thing I had seen.
That's a really awesome story, because it sounds like I just love like that a lot of horror fans have those early memories of going to video stores. Like that's such a an odd thing that people listening to this even today, if they're younger, would probably be like, but wait, what? You didn't just pick up your remote and just say, I want to watch Scream. And
we had to rewind it before we brought it back. Otherwise, they charge you like $2.
That's awesome. What about you, Tone? Was Scream your first as well, or did that pop your meta horror cherry?
Kind of. So when I was younger, I used to go from my dad's to my aunt's, and all my family kind of lived in the same area, so we'd all bike around. And one of my aunts, they had one of those old cabinets where you kept all your VHSs, and inside was Scream 2. And I remember seeing the trailers and stuff with, I think it's Randy and Dewey sitting at the cafe, and they're like, who could it be? And I remember being really excited, and I remember how big a deal Scream 2 was. And so when they had that movie, I had always wanted to watch it, but I wasn't really allowed to watch stuff like that. So I never watched it. But then finally one day I was like, fuck it, let's do it. So again, I was pretty young, and we watched it. And so that was probably my first experience, and it scared the fuck out of me. And, biking around, I was like, oh, is there someone out to get me? Like, even though I wasn't in college, obviously, but that was like my thought. And so that was probably my first exposure to it, was actually Scream 2. And I was like, dude, that was so cool. And that was scary, right? And then even in that movie, there's a Scream movie with Stab.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck is going on?
It has an entire secondary wrinkle. It's like meta.
Right, yeah. And so that was probably my first experience with meta, would be Scream 2, actually.
Well, Scream 2 blew up because everyone wanted to be in that. Like, there's so many, like, actors at that time that were popular that are in that. It's crazy.
Scream was massive. I mean, I feel like it's still like a cultural touchstone. Like, it's something where if you were a fan of horror in the 90s, you loved Scream. Like, I don't know anyone who has an argument against it.
Exactly. I bet if we sat on Google right now and all typed in meta horror, the first one that's going to come up is Scream, because they reference everything back to that. Because like I say, even when you go back to some of those movies that we named earlier, I don't know that they knew they were doing meta. Scream was very purposeful, you know?
Yeah, and that's a really good point that you bring up, because the writers, directors of things like Jason Lives might say, oh, you know, we were doing this intentionally, but yeah, they may not have even realized that was a genre that they could create and push. They may have just thought, oh, this is going to be a funny goof for the audience because we're doing the 6th Friday the 13th movie. My first experience with meta horror is a little bit blurry because I was born in 92. For me, my memories of Scream are very mixed up with how big like the Scary Movie franchise started getting.
Yeah.
My first memories of Scream were watching it as on VHS, but just being straight up scared by it. At that time, I was allowed to watch horror, but I was a very frightened kid, and I've talked a lot about this on the podcast. I was not like I was a fan, but I was a fan because I liked being so scared that I felt like my heart was going to beat out of my chest. You know, and that's a feeling that I miss as an adult, but as a kid, that's what I went into it for, because those things could seriously shock me, and Scream scared the shit out of me. I did not understand the comedy, and I didn't understand the meta part of it. I don't think I was quite old enough or knew that was a thing that people could do in movies. So I've watched it the first time just as a straight up horror movie, and I was freaked out by it. And then I ended up going to my family's house in Colorado, and they had Scream 2. And I vividly remember putting in Scream 2 and being so terrified that I had to go ask my grandma if I could stay in the room with her that night, like if I could sleep in the room. And it wasn't until, I don't remember exactly when it clicked, or if I maybe heard it from somebody, you know, somebody might have said, hey, or maybe I'd had my first exposure to the internet or something. But at some point, it dawned on me to rewatch Scream and pay attention to what Randy was saying. And at that point, I had seen AMC marathons of the Halloween movies and things like that. So I had a pretty decent understanding of horror tropes. Obviously nowhere near the monster I would become. But went back and rewatched it, and the very first time I rewatched it with that lens, knowing that it was a commentary, it was a kind of a satire, I absolutely fell in love with it, and I've been obsessed with that franchise ever since. I've seen all of those movies too many times to count, and especially the first one. I'll throw it on no matter how many times I've seen it. I'll throw it on and I'll notice something new. And I'll go, oh, that's a reference to a movie that I didn't get that until now because I hadn't seen that specific movie until a couple years ago. So it's a movie that I feel like rewards you for being a continuous horror fan. Every time you go back and rewatch it, it feels like it's an even better experience than it was the last time.
You're not the only one who didn't know that was part comedy, because Ski Ulrich was in that movie and didn't know it was part comedy. He would like pull Wes aside and be like, why is Matthew Lillard like so over the top? And they would be like, Ski, like, remember, this is also part comedy. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, that is like folklore from that movie. Like, they, and he's so intense in that, and he's so brooding. And then you see Matthew Lillard, who's so over the top. But yeah, that's just like the beauty of that movie. Like, you don't always know that it's a combo package. Some people think it's straight horror and still are very entertained by it.
Yeah, and that goes back to that same point that you and I were talking about earlier, which is it does a good job of just being a horror movie, which I feel like was something that we can talk about when we talk about like what we feel like the genre, which movies do it well and which movies don't do it well. Scream is able to pull off the horror and the comedy while still being a scary movie, I guess pun intended. It's respectful, and I think that's an important part of what makes a lot of these horror movies successful, is whether they end up just being good movies outside of being meta commentary. You know, I think Scream is a solid movie, and I guess I don't get a lot of exposure to people who don't love Scream, so I can't really speak for the people who don't like horror and maybe don't get it. But I think it's a great movie on its own.
Oh yeah, I've been going out with my boyfriend for 10 years, and about 2 or 3 years ago, I'm watching it just one random day, and he sits down next to me, and he's like, "What is this?" And I look at him, I go, "Who are you? How have we been dating this long?" At that point, which is like 7 years, I was like, "How?" And when you watch someone watch it for the first time, you're like, "This is like he's scared." I mean, you know what I mean? Like in a good way. It's intense.
So, Courtney, when we talked about having you come on, you had the idea of doing meta horror, so I just kind of wanted to leave it open to you to kind of tell us what you like about meta horror in general.
Because I am I'm a trivia buff, right? Like I'll go on a game show and I could clean them. So meta horror to me is like the ultimate trivia game. It's like, okay, how many references can I point out in this? Whether it is those movies, art, celebrities, urban legends, whatever it is, I love that game of being like, okay, this is a nod to this movie. Okay, they're talking about I mean, even in Scream, they're like, it's a one-off line, the Richard Gere gerbil story. It's like, you almost have to like listen for it, right? So I love that kind of piece of it, because the entire time, not only am I being entertained by watching these movies, I'm thinking about, oh my God, yeah, I love that movie, or I love that story that they're talking about. Oh, this, it relates to something in my life. So I think that's what I love about it, because it's kind of just like its own little pop culture feature.
It's almost kind of giving you a pat on the back for the work that you've done watching all these other movies.
Yeah, exactly.
You get those little like dopamine hits when you figure something out and you piece something together and you're like, oh, I saw that movie and that movie and that movie, and those references all came together to make this. It kind of gives you those synapses are firing,
Yeah. It's kind of like what Anthony was saying, where it adds more the more you've seen, and then you go back and watch it. Like, I could see Scream a bunch of times, but if I've never heard of or never seen I Spit on Your Grave, then that line, what is this, I spit on your garage?
Right.
I didn't get that
It means nothing
for a
to
long
you.
time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's kind of why I like it too, is just that it does kind of give you a reward for doing the work and for remembering all these fucking horror movies that you watch, because there are so many.
Mm-hmm.
You watched that really fucked up rape revenge movie, so now you get this little joke reference to it in our movie.
Yeah. You only need to see I Spit on Your Grave once, and you're like, I got it. That's enough. Like, I watched a YouTube video not that long ago where they're like, we're going to call every reference in this movie, and they had it broken down to categories: movies, music, actors, however they had it broken down, and they missed a handful of them. I was like, well, they missed that one, and I'm like rewarding my own self, like, as I'm playing along with what all the work they've put into it, I'm putting down basically. But
blowing them up in the comments.
Exactly.
So then, do we want to do some good examples? I mean, obviously we've touched on Scream a ton, because it kind of is the godfather of all of this. Even though there was stuff before it, Scream is the one that packed the most punch and shot the genre into kind of the public domain. So what are some other really good examples that you can think of, or some bad examples, either way?
If we're going to talk, I mean, we have to circle back to urban legend, because what was interesting about urban legend, even though it is very close to Scream, is they didn't go off of movies. They didn't go off of horror tropes. They went off of old-timey stories. So they're taking all of that like folklore, and they're kind of working it into modern society when they did that movie. And then modeling like the murders. Like, there's some creepy urban legends, like waking up in the bathtub and you're missing a kidney, you dry off the puppy in the microwave. All that stuff is weird and creepy, and it's been told 400 times. And here someone's using that as their like framework for, this killing spree. So I always really enjoyed that movie. It didn't hurt that Jared Leto's in it, and there's some good looking people to look at in it, like they did. But I really kind of liked it, because it really was just like, this is how these urban legends would play out if they were real. Some of them may be real. I mean, where do they come from, right? So it kind of just brings you back to those. I was always one that was into, I have this book that's called Alligators in the Sewer, and it talks about all the urban legends that they've been talking about for 100 years, so I was always kind of into that. In that movie alone, I think they do they either act out or reference 15, 16 urban legends. So I mean, you're hitting all the major ones that we've heard throughout time. So I always kind of really just enjoyed that movie for that sake of it.
Yeah, in terms of the meta aspect of that movie, I think that's the strongest point by far of that entire movie, is just the actual meta concept. I rewatched it getting ready for the show because I hadn't seen it since I was a kid, and that's actually what that and the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark books were what introduced me to urban legends and got me obsessed with reading about urban legends, because I thought those were even scarier than the horror movies because those were things that happened in real life, you know? Rewatching that movie, it doesn't hold up nearly as well in terms of the actual characters and that whole aspect, but the kills are good. And I mean, you can't beat Brad Dourif in the beginning, just like, there's somebody in the backseat. Like, that's scary as fuck.
And then having a turnaround, like, you know, everything's like so like calling on itself.
Well, and you even get, I bust up laughing when Joshua Jackson's character gets into the car at one point. You get a Dawson's Creek reference because he turns on the radio. It's like, I don't want to wait. Yeah, and he turns it off, and I was like, oh man, I did not get that when I was a kid.
They do a lot of calls to who they are. Like at the end, they say the Noxzema girl, which Rebecca Gayheart was. Robert Englund's obviously the professor, like it's Freddy Krueger. You know what I mean? So they do a lot of those plays almost to, instead of doing like their movie people, they kind of do it to who they are in real life in that movie too, which is a really interesting take on it.
Yeah. I think it makes it different enough from Scream that sure, it piggybacked, but it's not a straight ripoff.
Exactly.
And I think that part of why it works is because most people grow up with either those urban legends or similar urban legends, or at least hearing them. And so to see those played out is kind of scary. And so the first time you watch it, you're like, what are they going to do next? What are they going to do next? What are they going to do next? Are those pop rocks going to destroy his throat? And then you're like, what's going to happen? And so it's exciting because you know that these exist.
I've never seen the, they did a sequel and then they did like a home video one. I've never seen those two, but I have seen a scene online from the second one where the girl actually because I waited the whole movie for somebody to wake up in that ice bath, you know, missing a kidney. And it never happens. But in the second one, I have seen a scene where she wakes up and there's a kidney off to the side and she's got to like kind of make her way out of the bathroom without them noticing her. So there's some real creepy moments.
Yeah, the second one, they kind of steer away from the urban legends for the most part, which to me was the most disappointing. It's like they use a film and film sets, so it almost kind of has like a Scream 3 feel, but they don't really play into the idea of killing through urban legends like the first one does. It could have been called anything else, really.
I know, but just come up with your own thing. You don't have to be part of the franchise.
Pretty much.
It's funny, too. I was thinking, because you were talking about really wanting to see the kidney removal, and I'm like, when that movie came out, when the original urban legend came out, they were probably like, I don't know if that's too far. And then you get a franchise like Saw, where kidney removals happen like for fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Like for funsies. Yeah, at the start of a movie. So
they actually had to put gory scenes into urban legend. It was like too clean. And they're like, all right, we're going to go back and shoot a couple things. Because if you watch it, there's not a lot of blood. Because we're desensitized as a nation. So...
You guys want to just rattle off some other good examples? Shaun of the Dead,
Tucker and Dale vs. Evil.
Yeah.
Well, the one that we totally skipped over that I wanted to hit on, that I think is, besides Cabin in the Woods being like the end all be all, the one that I think really made a stamp on meta horror is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. I think
I've watched a trailer for that, but I have not seen that movie. But the trailer, I mean, you get the feel of what it is. It's so intriguing because it's so funny to go. Oh, he goes, I'm going to practice my slow walk now. It takes a lot, you know what I mean? It takes a lot out of me. Like, it's so funny because it's playing on all of those like silent stalker tropes. I have to see it.
I am so envious of you because that movie, I almost had, it felt like this the first time watching Scream, knowing that it was meta, like that first time I watched it, knowing what I was getting into. Going into this, I was not sure what it was. I had just heard, it's a good horror movie that's kind of self-referential. And this movie, I think, goes even further than Scream does in terms of really hitting every conceivable mark and has cameos from some big horror names and things like that. And even, I think, more importantly than doing the meta stuff that Scream did, it's also doing commentary on like the state of the genre in terms of found footage a little bit and like documentaries. for part of the movie. So it's a lot of fun and likable characters, which is very important, I feel like, to making these movies successful. And they make Leslie Vernon a surprisingly very likable character. So I encourage you highly to check it out after this conversation, because I think you will love the shit out of it, and I would like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I'm definitely down for that. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a movie
that's
that's
the first time 4 weeks ago. I watched it and I recommended it on our watch list for the show. I'm sad that it took me so long to see it, but they were jealous that they didn't get to see it again for the first time.
Yeah, I love I've gotten into this thing where when a new movie comes out, I almost will put it on the back burner because I like all like the buzz to fizzle out from it a little bit, and then I'm like, I want to get it on my own and like think my own thing about it. So cool. I'm awesome. I can't wait to watch it.
By the time Behind the Mask came out, people were kind of done with that style of movie, and it didn't have the buzz around it. And I think people in general are kind of over that because they're hip to it. And that's the problem, I think, at the end of the day. The challenge of making good meta horror is that people catch on super quick. I mean, that's the joke you're making when you make meta horror like Scream, is people who have caught on to the tropes. Well, once you bring that to light, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, where are you going from there?
So then every Scream sequel has to find some route to take, like, oh, now there's a movie that's being made about Scream. Now it's talking about, 4 is talking about the current digital video era and stuff like that. So they have to find some more kind of maybe ham-fisted way to comment on something. Some movies these days are maybe trying a little bit too hard to recapture something that you don't necessarily need to be trying to capture because it's kind of had its time.
Right. I do like that Behind the Mask as a mockumentary because I almost think there's a time for that piece of it. Like, they did that, what was that called? American Vandal or something on Netflix, where it was like the guy doing all the penises or whatever. It's like, there's a time for mockumentary too, and that could really be a good outlet for that. You know what I mean? So they can do meta in their own unique way. You don't have to be a carbon copy of everything that came before you. I mean, I know What You Did Last Summer was what? They came out 97 right after Scream, and it was a meta a little bit, but if you watch that, that's actually a little bit creepier and scarier than Scream because there's so much toying with somebody. So I think they almost kind of tried to take it, and they're like, all right, let's even make it more so a scary movie, So I think there are different avenues that you can take, and I think mockumentary is a fun one to do. And I think, backing off of, you don't have to reference movies. You can reference, like I say, who the people are in real life. You can reference these old folklores. Like, take some of that and work that into everything.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's a point that I wanted to make just in terms of why I feel like things like Scream work so well is because they are kind of a melting pot of the state of the genre at the time. So Scream was like took everything that people knew about where the genre was with the million sequels to slasher films and the played out tropes and said, now we're going to comment on that. So I think that's kind of what Leslie Vernon did a little bit of, is saying, oh, the found footage mockumentary thing is big right now in the state of horror. Let's comment on that. And I think if meta in the future, which we can get into how we want to feel, how we feel it should go in the future, needs to be not only commenting by referencing other horror movies, it needs to be commenting on the state of the genre as a whole. I feel like that's an important part of what makes the movie a successful satire, like you were saying. It makes it not a spoof.
And I do think that there is a particular component that we haven't really touched on a whole lot that I feel like is a big staple in meta, and it's not necessarily about how the movies are made or how they're written or anything like that. It's about the reception to them. And I think that more so than just about any type of horror, meta horror creates a discussion. And I feel like being able to sit here and talk for what's already 55 minutes about this subject and still have probably another 4 or 5 hours worth of avenues we could go down and, little offshoots and that sort of stuff. I think that...
Well, I'm going to have to stop to pee at some point, John. So.
But I think that having the ability to have a thoughtful discussion, and basically anytime you talk about something, learn a new thing every time. You can't say that about every horror movie. Like I said, I think that meta is specifically the only territory where, like, every single time you watch it, you're going to learn something new. You're going to find a new thing. You're going to be like, oh, that's a reference to that. I didn't know that because I hadn't seen that movie yet, or I hadn't read that book yet, or I hadn't seen that short yet, that sort of a thing. And I obviously I have a podcast about it. I love talking about horror. I think that having those abilities to have something cool, to have a new conversation about every time is, it's gold. It's something that you can't replace.
Agreed, because it brings you almost down like an intellectual path. I didn't go to film school until I did grad school. So I was a psych major up until I graduated, and then I said, I want to go to film school. And it was like until I got there, I hadn't found my footing with people that even had an interest in talking about it. So it was like all that shit was just going on in my mind all the time. There weren't those avenues to talk to really back then. And so we've come to a time where it's fun to kind of break down, psychology of a character. What are they referencing here? I always loved the 80s movies because they all had the Brat Pack in them. And what was so cool about that was, well, what were they all doing on the side? That's what was so intriguing. Who gave a shit if they recycled the same story 5 times? It was like, well, what are those guys doing on the side? Because their personal lives are really interesting, which is making everyone want to go see these movies. The writing's great on these movies, which is making people want to like take an interest in the characters. So it's kind of like this back and forth thing. That's kind of like the same way I feel about meta horror. It's like you take an interest in those actors, those characters, and everything because they're so self-aware, because they live in our modern society, basically.
I mean, I still get excited to see Nev Campbell in anything.
Yeah. Oh, and have you ever met any of them from Scream?
No, and I know you were talking about having met some people on your show, so I was a little bit jealous about that. So if you want to brag a little bit.
Have you guys ever heard of Texas Frightmare?
I believe I have, yeah.
You are missing out. So I live in New York, and I think I lived in Massachusetts at the time that I discovered it. Comes up on my Facebook one day, and here's a picture. You can meet Nev Campbell. I said, stop the presses. I booked a plane ticket. I don't care. Spare no expense. And so I went to this with my friend, and I'm talking, everybody's dressed up. And here I come, I dress like this, guys, even though I'm into, a horror. I come in like, a dress and flip-flops and like, wow, like this is an interesting environment. But it's the coolest horror con, the best one I've been to, because I've been to a few of them in different Comic Cons, but I would say Texas Frightmare is the best horror con, and that's where I've met a majority of them. Skeet Ulrich I met 3 times, Matt Lillard twice, Nev Campbell once, and then I met David Arquette once and Rose McGowan once. So I just have Courtney Cox and Jamie Kennedy to cross off the list. But I will tell you, Matthew Lillard, the nicest. I think must be because he played Shaggy. He's also like super into it. So he'll let all the kids come ahead in line. Like he's a very nice man, like a very down to earth man. And they'll do, him and Skeet will do panels together. And Skeet will go, okay, he's going to take over. Cause he's kind of just like a quiet guy. And so Matt Lillard like does the whole thing, and Skeet will chime in like every now and then. So if you have a chance to go to any of them, Skeet is going to be at next year's Texas Frightmare because COVID canceled this year's. But I'm telling you, it's really something to experience.
Oh my gosh, I'm ridiculously jealous, and also super happy that you said what you said about Lillard, because Matthew Lillard is like one of my favorite people in general, and part of that is because I was introduced to him through the Scooby-Doo movie. I saw that like when I was very young, and I fell in love with his Shaggy. And then, and I love Scooby-Doo, speaking of like children's horror.
Mm-hmm.
And then going and watching Scream, I was like, it's Shaggy. And then he's playing this like psychopathic, insane character. And I was like, this is so much fun. This is so cool. So hearing that he's a really nice guy who's
Movies
like
don't make the killers.
Really energetic and crazy. And then to put the icing on the cake, he showed up in Twin Peaks in the newest season, which is my favorite show of all time. So
he's just a cool, like you can tell, I'm a pretty good judge of character. You can tell he's personable. And even Skeet is super nice too. Like really just not, he's just a quieter kind of guy, but really super nice. Like cause they have somebody who takes the money for him, when you get your autograph, and we're like, well, where's your money person? He goes, oh, out there star fucking. Like, he just talks like a regular person.
That's awesome.
Do you want to talk about some bad examples? Some real schlock? Well, I think unfortunately, Scream 3.
Yeah, Scream 3 is definitely on that list.
Is on that list.
I had a mistaken hot take on Scream 2 that I meant to say for Scream 3 one time on the show, and these guys almost had a heart attack. I was like, Scream 2 sucks ass. It's such a terrible movie. And they were like, what the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, and then it dawned on me afterward. I was like, oh, I was talking about Scream 3 that entire time. And because that movie is not
rough.
A lot of fun.
Well, the bangs ruined the movie. No, I'm just kidding. But you know that there was an original concept for that would have been remarkably better, which was Matt Lillard's character was supposed to live. And then he was supposed to be kind of like from prison leading this group of teenagers who were doing like the killing spree type thing. But Columbine happened, put the kibosh to that idea. And so here they come with this stupid Hollywood, change everything plot. I never cared for Scream 3. I think it's everyone's least favorite.
Yeah, and from what I've heard, they didn't even have really that planned out from the beginning in terms of what that reveal was going to be, of like who the Roman character was going to be or anything like that from the very beginning. That was kind of, it was a lot more, I feel, cobbled together, and that points to the problem that we were talking about earlier, which is just that the more you do this meta style, the harder it gets to really capture the magic that made it work in the first place. Scream 2 was able to still have enough juice, I think, enough gas in the tank to survive a sequel and comment on sequels.
Right.
And movie fans in general know sequels are a scary thing. By the time you get to the third movie, it's like, okay, what are we actually saying anymore?
Yeah, they're like, oh, all the rules out the window.
You kill everybody's favorite character off in the second one or whatever, and then what do you do from there?
Yeah, they're like, oh, we got this videotape that he happened to make, like, when he was still alive, like, just in case. Like, it's so lame. I hate that. I would have rather he was in Ghostface's basement for all those years or something. You know what I mean?
I mean, you talked about, it's not a horror movie, but Rim of the World is a movie that does that kind of referential style in a very poor, lazy way.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think what can make meta horror bad is when it's used to cover up just shitty writing. Like if you make a bad horror movie and then you want to cover that up by having it constantly reference good horror movies. We went on a long spiel about this when we talked about that movie, Rim of the World, but it's just, hey, you remember this? And that's supposed to give you that little dopamine hit, to keep you going through the movie is, oh, you remember this? And you go, oh yeah, I remember Friday the 13th. And then you're just waiting for the next reference and being bored the entire time you're watching the rest of the movie. Scream 3, I feel it that way, I'm like, oh, there's some cool meta stuff. But for the most part, I'm sitting there kind of bored out of my mind by a lot of the actual movie. And so I feel like the meta a lot of time is lazy. It's kind of used to cover up bad filmmaking.
Yeah, I don't mind going back and changing something from the beginning, right? I wouldn't have minded that piece of it so much. The way it played out with the Hollywood thing, and this one's playing that one, and this one's playing that one, and there's a movie going on. I hated all. It was so. They lived in Woodsboro. It was like a little peaceful community, The final act of scene 1 plays out in a damn farmhouse, and all of a sudden now we're in Hollywood. It's just, it didn't fit with it.
There are some meta things I feel like that go out of their way to alienate the audience by making it just all references and all throwbacks. And the Scream TV show felt a little bit more like it was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
It was covering up lazy writing and storytelling by just throwing as much of the references to other things as it could at you.
Oh, it was so overwhelming. It was too much. And that's what, you guys have heard the pod, but I'm basically screaming at Joe the whole time because I'm like, this is just terrible. And this is the reason why it's terrible. And this is the reason it's not Scream. I really always hated that. That's why I'm not big into spoofs either. I hated Scary Movie. I'll watch it, sure. But I don't like it because I don't like that it's making fun of the thing that I love so much.
Just feels like there are people who don't respect the genre that are just shitting on it just to make fun of it. And if you're a horror fan, a lot of people do that to you anyway.
Right?
You don't need a movie franchise there to tell you that horror is goofy as shit, telling you that it doesn't deserve awards and it's not worth anything and it's garbage. This is exhausting. I don't need to defend myself to you, Wayans brothers.
Exactly. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think there's a lot to be said for even what you said about not winning awards. I mean, the acclaim that even Jordan Peele has gotten for his work now says something about how far we've come, because it's not just trashy slashy anymore. It's developed over time. So there's hope.
Us is definitely a perfect example of what I want to see in the future. I want to see it be subtle. I think that showing that room at the very beginning of Us where there's the copy of Chud on VHS and then referencing it at the end, but not over the top, hammering it in, just having it be oh yeah, there's underground dwellers, that kind of thing. Having it just be a subtle reference, something that you have to think about, something that you might have missed if you didn't discuss it with someone else after the show. That's what I want to see moving forward with meta. I want to see it be very light meta, because we've gotten Cabin in the Woods, we've gotten Scream, we've gotten the over-the-top stuff. I want to see it compressed a little, and in a movie that is more about the movie and less about the reference.
Great point.
Absolutely. Where do you feel like this is headed? This train, I don't even know if it's a train now. It's maybe one boxcar in no steam.
I fear that it's headed to a place that I don't like, which is politics. I don't like. That was the whole reason I hated this season of Cult for American Horror Story. It was just so politically heavy. It overwhelmed me. We're surrounded by that every day. I don't want to be entertained by that too. So I fear that's where it's headed. Where I would love for it to be headed was I want to take those things that are everyday things that like really scare you and amp those up and have that kind of be referenced. It can be society driven without getting political, without getting, everything. What scares you on every. I'm terrified of heights. I'm terrified of, small spaces. I want to see those kind of things come into play and get some of those old, our horror movie vets and put them into these situations where they're more relatable. You know what I mean? You can throw Robert Englund in there. He doesn't have to just say his one lines and be Freddy or have to, he can be a developed character. It would be great to grab all those guys, put them in a few movies and see a different side of them. Because I think that will kind of be a really nice nod to horror, that they don't have to play themselves. They can be a developed character, because that's what's so great about meta. You know what I mean? That you really get more character depth, basically.
Yeah,
I
totally.
agree with that.
That's kind of what he did in An Urban Legend, right? He wasn't super well developed as a character, but at least we got him playing not just a Freddy homage. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's not there just to slash people open and call him a bitch.
Yeah.
Right.
Going forward, it's going to be interesting. I can already see little hints of what you were saying about like things that are scary in everyday life, because there are a lot of fears about the internet and social media and privacy that I feel like are going to get tapped into for horror movies. You see a little bit of it with the cyberbullying and things like Unfriended. That obviously turns into like a crazy supernatural goof fest.
Where it could have went a way better like whodunit direction. But
yeah, and I think an actually scarier version of that would be is it Searching?
Yes.
The movie with John Cho.
Mm-hmm.
Searching was excellent.
Yeah, Searching is a movie that's more of, I think, a thriller, but I mean, I think that's a good example of a movie that takes things that are scary about real life and about social media and plays with them in a way that makes a really compelling story. So I could see that happening. I think the thing with meta horror is that we need more time to see what the new tropes are. We've already made fun of all of the 70s, 80s, 90s tropes.
Right.
Now we're developing all these new styles of like the high art horror films or the elevated horror films now that people are terming
your Eggers.
Yeah, the Ari Asters, the Robert Eggers, and things like that. But see where those movies end up going, like what develops out of that, and then let us get a strong collective sense of what the horror genre is again. Because I don't feel like we really have that now. I feel like we're in a weird place, and we've discussed this on the show, where the horror genre is in a strange place of being really popular with people, but it's in a metamorphosis.
Yeah, where it's not. When was the last time you were legitimately scared watching one of these newer movies? You know what I actually found pretty creepy, and that was still 100,000 years ago, was Vacancy, and people hated that movie. But I thought it was so creepy, because I hate that thing of like, I'm trapped in like one room, and like here come people, and I have no way out of this room. So you know what I mean? Like it plays on my particular fears, which I think I saw. But has there been anything lately you guys have been actually like scared watching?
Hell House LLC.
Yeah, so
The first couple of those are pretty scary.
yeah, nothing that I've seen in theaters at all, like no big releases. But yeah, like Anthony said, the movie Hell House LLC is, I would say, almost a little bit meta in its storytelling as well, in terms of the fact that it's a haunting movie. It's framed as people running a haunted house, like for Halloween, out of an old abandoned building. So they start, really creepy stuff starts happening, with the setup being that there are already the dummies and the decorations for a Halloween haunted walkthrough. So actually that kind of ties a little bit into the subject of like commenting on a real life thing and being a little bit meta. So yeah, I would check that out if I were you too. Throw that on your recommendation list, is Hell House LLC. Yeah, but that freaked us out. But in general, yeah, I agree. There's stuff that makes me uncomfortable, and that's more the feeling I get from the more modern horror. Stuff that gets under my skin and makes me feel maybe a little bit sick would be something like a Hereditary or a Midsommar, or even like The Lighthouse or something, where I'm like, oh, that wasn't like horror, but it was horrifying.
Yeah.
It was disgusting and disturbing without being gory. So yeah, we're in a weird time of change, and I feel like I wrote in my notes, let's give it some time, and then let's start making we'll start commenting on these movies once they're established, once the genre has some sort of footing again.
Like Us and Get Out, I think you're going to find it is going to gear towards those, and those are the movies that we're going to be looking back on because they're so original now. Like, they just made The Invisible Man. Well, how many freaking times are they going to make The Invisible Man? You know what I mean? It's like all that is played over and over and over again. At least his were original. So I think those are the ones you're going to find them referencing years down the line.
What do you think is going to happen with Scream 5? Do you think that that's going to be successful, or do you think it's going to come and go, kind of similar to how Scream 4 did?
My hope is that they can come up with something new and not rely on the techiness that Scream 4 did. I kind of didn't want them to do Scream 5. I want to watch Scream 5, absolutely. But I didn't want them to do it because Wes was the last one who actually was they kept one director for a franchise. Well, of course, he's gone now, so they're not going to be able to do that. So, that was kind of like my iffiness about it. But I don't know what direction they're going to take it. And I want, Neve Campbell, she's in her 40s, right? Like, how long is she going to kick ass for? I don't want them to throw the focus to a new, younger person. I hope it is her. Like, you guys watched when they did the new Halloween with Jamie Lee. I actually quite hated that because they ignored a couple of movies in there. Like, they're like, oh, no, he wasn't her brother. Oh, no. Like, there was a few things that they ignored. So I really didn't like that. So I hope that they don't do this with Scream. Like, don't ignore any of that. Go back and talk about Scream 1. Like, go back to what the whole story was, which is your boyfriend's trying to kill you. Talk about it with her. Get behind the psychology of Sydney, and that will kind of be a direction I think I would be interested to see it go in.
Do you think that they should continue to do the 2 killers? Maybe stick with 1, maybe go for 3? Or fuck it, go for 5.
I always loved the first time it was the 2 killers because the whole movie you're like, well, who is that? And then when it's 2, it's like, wow. I really hated when they did Roman by himself. I thought it was a stretch. I think you need to, because I don't think you can pull off the stuff if we're talking about, if this is real life and they really had to do it. I think you need to. I think 3 is too many, and I think 1's not enough. You just feasibly couldn't do it.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why 3 just doesn't play so well is because it feels a lot less like a whodunit.
Yeah.
Because you get that quality from 1, from 2, and from 4. Because you're not sure, because when you can see a person in front of you who is obviously not Ghostface, but Ghostface is doing crazy stuff, and then they swap around, so you always are like, oh, well, they have an excuse. They were here when Ghostface was doing this. But in reality, there's 2 of them.
What you said about, having to have 2 killers, I mean, that's just another great meta thing that movie is doing by saying, they know that people are going to be asking, how could one person do all of this? And they're like, well, easy solution that nobody's going to think about because going into this, they're still adjusted to the one slasher killing everybody. They're not going to expect this. So it's a really cool way of using how they know you're going to be watching that movie to trick you. To pull the rug out from under you at the end. And it's a really great reveal. I think that the really balls to the... And this is not a serious idea. I was going to say the really balls to the wall thing they could do would be get really meta about franchises that have had, 4 sequels or whatever. And how, in Halloween and things like that, they start getting into curses and satanic rituals and stuff like that. Have it be no killer. Have the mask be a sentient, cursed object. The mask has whoever wears it turns into the killer or something.
It's The Mask.
Yeah, basically, it would just. Yeah, I was like, that's a really goofy direction they could take it in if they wanted to really go balls to the wall and to bring back an established franchise that kind of had its time. I mean, I totally agree with you, and I think we do too. That once Wes passed, we had all kind of agreed that we were done with Scream. We were fine with it ending at that point.
Right.
And then the TV show just showed us that it shouldn't be done.
I didn't mind season 3 of that show because when I watched that, like I said, because I wanted to kind of hold it against the other, I didn't mind it as much because it almost seemed like, well, here's a new take. They had, a couple people lived in the end. It wasn't one final girl. You know what I mean? They had their own little thing with it in season 3, but you're right. It's the time. I wonder why they wanted to do it now is my question. If 20 years has passed, so it's not the 20-year mark where they're hitting an anniversary. It's like, well, what is their reasoning? Maybe they're going to come up with something that's going to just completely shock us. I don't know.
I have 2 words for you. Cash money.
Yeah.
I want to see Randy faked his death and he and Sydney are now on a killing spree.
Holy shit, that would do it for me.
That would be the ultimate bow. And watch, they're going to know we're thinking that. And if they're smart, they're going to subvert our expectations.
Yeah. And then,
Because if
and do
they have
something even
two,
better.
then they could still pretend that Sydney's getting attacked.
right.
So then people aren't like, well, why didn't Sydney get attacked?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have her reference the first one by being like corn syrup. Having faked her injuries too. Like, oh, I learned it from, my boyfriend or whatever.
I wouldn't mind if they just took the original plot for Scream 3 and did that again. Like, have Stu still be alive. They're only in their, 40s. Like, he'll still be in prison. Like, just take it and run with it. I don't know. God, I hope it's not like, oh, and here's the teenagers and they're related to her somehow again. Like, I'm done with that too.
Yeah, I think that I like the idea of bringing Stu back. I think that Matthew Lillard needs to be in more things.
Wholeheartedly agree. I don't know why he's not in more things, truthfully. To me, he was the breakout actor of Scream. They always gave all the praise to him. So I'm not sure whatever, went from there.
I think he's pretty choosy, which is something that I'm not upset about. There are definitely actors who I love who have done god-awful things. My favorite actor from like the drama territory is Robert De Niro, and he's done some terrible movies, especially in the last decade or
Is that
so.
Shaggy Dog movie?
You kind of sounded like Pacino when you were doing that. When you said terrible, I was like, oh, are you channeling your Pacino now? So I think we're cautiously optimistic for Scream 5. I mean, we would obviously all, as big fans of Scream, love it to be good. I was at an age when meta horror came along that it kind of introduced me to filmmaking in general. It kind of got me hooked on the idea that there was something going on behind the scenes. It was no longer just I was looking at a box where somehow people were doing things inside. It was like, oh, okay, like other movies exist and it's some sort of shared universe consciousness, and that you can actually look into movies and find out what the language is and find out. And horror, I think, is so universal and so visceral with the way it makes people feel that it's a very, very good genre to be meta, to be broken down and broken apart and dissected a lot better than a lot of other genres, because it really does have a universal, not appeal, but a universal kind of emotional thing it's going for, and a universal set of ways it tries to go about that. So it's a really, really fun genre to deconstruct, and I'm really happy we finally got around to having like a long form discussion about this, because we've been kind of teasing around doing this discussion for a really long time. And the fact that we got to do it with you and actually bring in another voice who is as passionate, if not more passionate, as we are about some of these films, I think has been really awesome. So yeah, I'm super stoked that we got to do this.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I was really pumped. This was the kind of thing where, like, when Joe and I do our show, we're like, all right, we got a handle on it. This was the kind of thing where I was like, I'm going to prep for a week because I'm so excited to do this show with you guys. Because, like, I feel like sometimes my show can be, like, formulaic a little bit because we have to run through what happened. Otherwise, our episodes will be 4 hours long. So it's like here, I'm so glad that we got to have, like, the discussion about it. And you're right, it comes down to just the writing on these movies too. And as I'm a writer myself, and it's like the thought and the planning that must go into it when it's good it deserves so much praise. When it's bad, kick those friggin' people to the curb because they're just being lazy, So that's the great thing about meta. You can tell the laziness from like the really good, well thought out.
Do you have anything that you would like to recommend for anybody listening to this episode to check out?
I really haven't been watching anything new lately. I've been watching a lot of repeat stuff. I love nostalgia, so I've just been kind of going back and watching some old things again. One thing I enjoy listening to that talks about movies, and they do every genre, so you can kind of find some different ones in there, is have you guys ever listened to How Did This Get Made?
Yes.
Yeah, love it, yeah.
So that's been my thing, just driving to work and stuff like that, and I'll pick out ones that I've seen, and they do, like I say, they do all the genres, so that's kind of where I've been lately. I haven't even been watching a lot just because it's summer and I'm in the car more. So I'm still getting like my movie fix, but I'm just doing it, and like, I mean, those guys are so funny. I literally laugh out loud like while I'm driving. So
Jason Mantzoukas is like one of the funniest people on earth. And then the last thing is, I just wanted, if you have anything, the podcast, and then anything else that you're working on or anything else that you wanted to plug, feel free to do another rundown of what your show is and what you have to kind kind of plug for the listeners.
Tell the
and
people where they can
should
find
check
you
out.
and everything.
Thank you. Again, it's called Courtney and Joe Spoil Everything. We're on Instagram at @SpoilEverythingPod. I also built a website for 4 months that nobody visits. It's called WeSpoilEverything.com. So Joe always runs the social media and I run the website, and no one's ever visiting my website. So check it out on there. What I do on the web is I'll put up last week's episodes, but otherwise, if you want to listen to every episode, we're on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple. I think we're on a couple other platforms too, but those are the main ones. And yeah, we're always just looking for feedback too. We really would like people to kind of shoot us over TV suggestions, and if we haven't seen it, we're happy to do it and happy to have guests on the show. So yeah, again, that's Courtney and Joe Spoil Everything.
Cool. I think that about wraps it up for our conversation, unless there's anything anybody else has to add.
Thanks for coming on and joining us.
You guys too. Thank you so much, and we'll talk again.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
absolutely. We'll hit you up on Instagram. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Thanks.
Well, thanks again, Courtney, for joining us. It was a blast to have you. Hopefully we can see her again. So, listeners to our show, if you haven't checked out Courtney and Joe Spoil Everything, then go ahead and do that and let her know what you think and let us know what you think. Now that the main discussion is over, though, we will jump into our watch list.
Patrick, what is it? Where are you going?
I've got to return some videotapes.
This week for me, for Watchlist, I dived into a little show on Amazon called Hannah. So this is based off a movie that Joe Wright made quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that movie. It's kind of like a modern day spy fairy tale.
Yeah.
Super weird. And the show, I haven't finished the first season yet, but so far has proven to be pretty similar and is equally good. And it's really weird. It has, I can't remember the guys' names, but that show, The Killing, there was the main dude and the main actress, and they're both in this show again.
Oh,
I was
really?
like, that's so funny that they just do a bunch of shit together. So it's very similar, just expanded, obviously. And I'm interested to see where it goes, but I would highly recommend it as of right now. What about you, John? What's on your W?
So for me, I have been plugging away at Metalocalypse, and I finished off the series. It's been a long while since I've watched it, and I barely remember some of the later episodes in the series, so it was good to kind of finish that off. I think the thing that's probably the least watched of all of their entire episode catalog is the rock opera that they did, basically as the cap to season 4, beginning to season 5, which never ended up existing. I would suggest to check it out. It's called the Doomstar Requiem. Very well put together. It's a 50-piece orchestra plus Brendan Small and all of his friends, making crazy, weird metal opera music and shit. It's a lot of fun. I would highly suggest to check it out.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, I haven't started Metalocalypse yet, but I know we got somebody on the socials, I forget who, was saying that that they had recently gotten like a second copy of Metalocalypse or something. I'll have to check it out. Where is that?
It's on HBO Max currently.
HBO Max? Okay, cool.
Did that show end abruptly?
It did, yes. So Brendan Small had the intent to do an entire 5th season, and Adult Swim cut him off and said no. He went back.
I wonder why, because wasn't that pretty popular?
It had waned in popularity towards the end, but then it's gotten somewhat of a resurgence recently. People listening to the music, people trying to get a hold of the episodes. I'm hoping that the fact that it's on HBO Max, and if enough people watch it, that they might do like an Adult Swim HBO Max collab and make it just a streaming only platform kind of thing, and let him at least finish his story, because there was still probably another 8 to 10 episodes worth of content to wrap everything up, because it has kind of like a flavor of the week, kind of like crazy metal, brutal stuff over the top, but then it also has like an overarching theme that goes from episode 1 all the way to the end. So I'm sad that I didn't get a chance to see where that to the end goes.
Yeah, that sounds frustrating as fuck.
And it leaves you on kind of a cliffhanger. So I'm like, I want to know what fucking happens.
I'd be absolutely shocked if that doesn't come out at some point. Like it, especially around this time. I think that it makes sense that Adult Swim was probably clearing out for a lot of their newer stuff.
Yeah.
Like that they wanted to put more focus on things like the Rick and Mortys of the world. But yeah, I would be, especially if I get into the show, I'll definitely be excited for the possibility of a new season. On my watch list, I decided to Since you recommended this last week, I won't actually put it on my watch list, but I checked out Palm Springs and thought that it was a ton of fun, very charming, and a really nice little twist on the Groundhog Day style time loop. So what I decided to do is theme this week's watch list on being stuck in a time loop. Movies that take place with that premise. So what I decided to do was decided to do movies that are people stuck in a time loop, like movies that have that as the premise. So what I decided to do was do movies that are stuck in a time loop. So if you see these movies, that's the premise, is that they're stuck in a time loop.
That was fucking very well executed, sir.
Oh, fuck.
Thank you. The first recommendations that I'll give right off the bat is I think that the Happy Death Day movies are both pretty high quality.
Oh, you finally got to watch the second one, huh?
Yeah, and I thought that while, it's goofier than the first one, I think the performances, especially from the lead actress, are strong enough, and it has kind of its own flavor.
Yeah, they don't try to remake the magic. They kind of just go into a comedy direction.
Exactly,
And
yeah,
it
more
works.
like bigger crazier sci-fi comedy stuff. So
Right.
those will be my quick recommendations, but I wanted to look for movies that I hadn't seen that were kind of off the beaten path with this concept, and so I found a Wikipedia article that was all time loop movies. So I ended up checking out one from 2014 the other day called Blood Punch. This movie it's pretty quirky. It reminded me a little bit of maybe something that Edgar Wright would do. It's a guy who gets roped into like this love triangle and taken to a cabin to help make meth for this couple. And they end up getting stuck in a time loop of murdering the boyfriend, the boyfriend of the girl that ropes him into this love triangle, and so they just get to murder him in increasingly different and gruesome ways, and it evolves into a really insane plot from there. It's not the most well put together, but if you're looking for time loop movies that have this concept and you want something that's kind of goofier and maybe a bit more fun, I would check out Blood Punch. It has some really good gore moments. The other one that I checked out that's on Netflix is called The Incident. This one actually is probably my strongest recommendation if you really want something that takes this time loop idea and completely does something different with it, which is rather than having characters that are stuck in the same day, it has two groups of characters that are stuck in a specific location that's looping. So it's two brothers who are running from a detective because they committed some sort of crime. They run into the stairwell of their apartment complex and get stuck in an infinite loop in this stairwell that just keeps repeating. And there's also a family that is going on a family vacation, and they get stuck on a road that just keeps repeating, and they keep passing the same sign and the same gas station over and over again. And it plays, and they end up being stuck there for quite an extensive amount of time. And it ends up being a really interesting and kind of frightening look at what can happen to somebody mentally, like how somebody would cope with being stuck in a situation like that. That part of the movie is really good. It kind of loses steam at the end and gets a little convoluted, but I would say it's definitely worth it just for that concept for the first hour and change. It's pretty uncomfortable and freaky and a cool spin, like I said, on the time loop thing. So I watched a movie called Blood Punch, where no, I'm just kidding.
I was like, what?
Yeah, so
I'm in on the joke and it still got me.
Yeah, those are my time loop recommendations for this week. Hopefully I'll come and hit you with a new theme next week.
If you want more of our extended watch list, then you can head over to Instagram, where we post that every week.
Every Thursday.
Every Thursday, typically. And it's what we watched here, what we just told you about, and then even more stuff that we weren't able to talk about on the show, because this one with a guest got pretty lengthy. Next week, we got another exciting episode. We're going to dive into a little bit more of the sci-fi realm and give you guys our 5th Sci-Fi Redemption. So for those, I will be watching War of the Worlds. John is going to check out Ex Machina, and Anthony, in true symmetry fashion, will be watching The Fifth Element.
Hell yeah, bro.
Super excited. I've been dying to watch War of the Worlds, and I think you've been dying to watch Ex Machina,
Yes.
and I think you're pretty lukewarm on watching The Fifth Element.
Yeah. Are you watching the old school War of the Worlds, like the old one, or are you watching the Tom Cruise
The
Spielberg
Tom Cruise
one?
Spielberg one.
Oh, you've never seen that?
I've never seen any of them.
Oh shit. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say about both of yours, and I'm sure you guys are interested to hear what kind of potentially lava takes I'm gonna have about.
You're the
Fifth
tiebreaker.
Element.
Yeah,
On the Fifth Element.
because I am the lava take.
Yeah.
I am vehemently in the anti-Fifth Element camp. I'm going to rewatch it as well because I haven't seen it in probably about 6 or 7 years, and I'm going to give it another chance so that way we can talk about how much I still fucking hate it. Because I just don't see it being redeeming for me.
Well, I am sure as shit looking forward to it. Oh, real quick, before we go, something that I wanted to do is I do want to shout out just a couple podcasts that have been really awesome and supportive of us recently. And one of them is the We Love Horror podcast. I had mentioned that he had a really great episode on It Follows recently. He messaged us and told us how much he loves our show and said that he wants to start shouting us out on his show. So yeah, We Love Horror, a great podcast. They just got started up. He lost his co-host. So if you guys can go support him, he's bringing on guests and trying to make that as magical as possible. The Extreme Horror Replay podcast started our show from episode 1, which is absolutely crazy, and I don't know
why anyone would put themselves through that.
Yeah, why anyone would suffer like that.
Everybody should do that. Everybody in the world should do that.
Yeah, become a real experts. So yeah, the Extreme Horror Replay podcast, Radio Nasties, as always, great friends of the pod, and the Creepy Crap podcast. I got to make a new logo for his show, so if you guys have not checked out the Creepy Crap podcast, he has a brand spanking new logo made by yours truly. That was his dream logo, so I was very excited to be able to help him out with that. So yeah, check all those out if you haven't already, and I'm sure we'll have many more friends to shout out on future episodes. But thank you all for your support and everybody who has been hitting us up and talking to us. It means the world.
Yes, and to piggyback off that, we appreciate all the listens that we're getting, so thank you everyone out there who is hearing me right now for listening to this episode. We will see you next week. I've been good old-fashioned Anthony.
Good old-fashioned John.
And I've been new, brand spanking new, super sexy, bigger, longer uncut Anthony.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
Keep it creepy. You can find Porcelain Peak on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Store, Spotify, TuneIn, and Stitcher. Wherever you listen, don't forget to rate, review, share, and subscribe so you never miss a spine-tingling episode. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and at porcelainpeak.com for additional content. Special thanks to Randy Greer for composing the Porcelain Peak intro music and to Anthony Silva for designing the Porcelain Peak logo. All episodes and additional content is hosted, written, produced, designed, and edited by the Porcelain Peak team, consisting of Anthony Perez, John Brasher, and Anthony Silva.
This has been a Words for Weirdos production.